We will start today with the Chancellor of the Exchequer's wife, but I think we'll also start with a little bit of the old psychology. I like a bit of the old psychology. Because, do you ever do this? You hear about something that a politician has done, and I think it is unique to politicians. I think that if you are in government in particular, or seeking to be in government, then there should be, but possibly already I'm going to sound a little bit crackers to you, but I think you have to abide by the rules. Well, this isn't going to land, is it? Because we're talking about Boris Johnson's government. The idea that you should abide by the rules even more than everybody else. You should be required to be even more careful and even more responsible and even more honest, if you like, than everybody else, because you are in government. God, I sound so naive. It's almost like I'm broadcasting to you from 2002 or something like that. Surely we can all agree, says this idiot on your radio. Surely we can all agree that, says James O'Snowflake, that if you're the Prime Minister or the Chancellor of the Exchequer or a member of the Cabinet or a leader of the opposition, then you are required not just to abide by the rules, but to go above and beyond the requirements that the rest of us must follow. Because in the simplest terms, you must lead by example. So you can't tell lies in the House of Commons, never mind on the side of buses. You can't have parties while you've introduced laws that prevent the rest of the country from even shaking hands. You can't call it fluff when people are still mourning lost loved ones that they couldn't even say goodbye to. You can't do these things. I mean, morally, no one should be able to do them. But politically, the idea that the people in charge would do them is absolutely unthinkable. Except, of course, it isn't. It is now so commonplace that, as we mentioned yesterday, Boris Johnson telling a lie has become, in newspaper terms, dog bites man. In other words, completely commonplace and expected, as opposed to the polar opposite of dog bites man, man bites dog, which is, except I suppose in parts of Asia, is a remarkable occurrence when man bites dog. So here we are. Where's the psychology? Well, the psychology is here. I now catch myself thinking, well, it looks absolutely appalling to me, this. I mean, it looks almost unbelievably bad. You are living in Downing Street while using a non-domicile status, tax status, to avoid paying taxes into the treasury that your own husband runs, or is sort of in nominal charge of. I mean, you can't even begin to get your head around the egregiousness, the moral egregiousness of that. You live in Downing Street, but for tax purposes, you don't even live in the country. I mean, come on! And then that little voice, the psychology. It's probably not even psychology in a technical sense, is it? But I've used the word now, so I'm sticking with it. The little voice then says, well, hang on a minute. If they did it, right, then it possibly isn't as bad as it looks, because they must have. Do you see what I mean? Like, because I'm a little person. I'm not, I'm not a billionaire or even a billionaire's husband. I'm not a Chancellor of the Exchequer. I'm still Jimmy from the block. So I'm thinking, well, all right, it looks awful. And yeah, I remember when they were all queuing up to castigate Jimmy Carr. Didn't David Cameron have a crack at Jimmy Carr for his perfectly legal tax avoidance? Gary Barlow got into all sorts of trouble, didn't he, for perfectly legal tax avoidance? So I'm thinking, well, maybe it's not that bad because they did it. Do you see what I mean? Maybe it's okay because they did it. Then they wouldn't have done it if it was as bad as I think it looks. Oh, the knots we tie ourselves in, honestly. And, I mean, imagine if those are the knots you tie yourself in when you're fairly confident that this is outrageous conduct, albeit perfectly legal. Imagine the knots you'd have to tie yourself into today to pretend that this was all okay. And that's absurd. Of course, it's perfectly reasonable for the Chancellor of the Exchequer's actual wife to live in Downing Street, but not live in the United Kingdom at all for tax purposes. And what on earth is wrong with that? It's incredible. It's not quite up there with Rupert Murdoch being described as one of the most dangerous people on the planet by Joe Biden, and mysteriously up pops the Putin apologist Tucker Carlson with some heavily edited and doctored footage of Joe Biden at the White House, which client journalists in America now on Fox News are punting out there to try to make Joe Biden look bad. We're not quite in that level of contortion and truth twisting yet, but my goodness me, I almost can't wait to see what they do to wriggle off this one. How tightly, how many times have I asked you this question? How tightly would your scarf have to be tied around your neck in order to pretend that this is okay? And let's not forget that the defence that's been offered up by Mrs. Sunak is essentially claiming that everybody living in this country who is not in possession of a British passport has no choice but to avoid paying taxes on money earned overseas into the British Treasury, which is going to come as a massive shock to an awful lot of people I know who don't have British passports. Did you know that? Did you know that? Yeah, that's absolutely perfectly. I mean, you've got no choice. That's the point. That's the claim. As I read it, we'll be speaking a little later to a tax expert on the issue specifically of this claim, that if you have an Indian passport, you can't have dual nationality. Therefore, you have no choice but to become non-domiciled. I don't think that's true. I just don't. 9 minutes after 10 is the time. So, I mean, at what angle do you want to come from it? Come at it. From what angle do you want to come at it? I must get my words in the right order. I'm not Yoda. I just don't know some days where to even begin. How hard is it to be non-dom? 03456060973. As I understand it, it's quite difficult. I mean, you can't just turn up at your local co-op, can you, and register as a non-dom. You are living here. I think the owner of the Daily Mail was reported to have been in this position not long ago. Whether he still is or not, I'm not sure. But you have to be careful what you say. But here's an interesting thing. Here's a really interesting thing. If you're wrestling with this as I am. Imagine I now said, I'm pretty sure that Lord Tuffington Buffington, who sits in the House of Lords after being promoted by Boris Johnson, I'm pretty sure he was a non-dom for a while. And it turned out I was wrong. Would that be libel? This is, we've stumbled across a really clever way of having this conversation. Would that be libel? So if you were a member of the government, right, sitting in the House of Lords, and it emerged that you were a non-dom, that you were not paying tax into the Treasury in this country on money that you earned overseas, in the way that, almost everybody else is required to do. I think it's around about 38.1%, the rate that you'd be paying here. And if I accidentally outed you on the radio erroneously, I got the wrong Lord, it was Lord Buffington, and I said Lord Tuffington, would that be libel? I think it would. I think you would have a case for claiming that I had done reputational damage to you by claiming on the radio that you had engaged in a perfectly legal tax avoidance scheme while working as a member of the government, or even just while married to a member of the government. I think that constitutes reputational damage, which is a really interesting wrinkle, isn't it, on the question of whether or not we should draw distinctions between what is legally wrong and what is morally wrong. That's it's probably not quite as interesting as I think it is it? Every time I get excited like this, like a little Tigger, a little Labrador, someone else comes along and hits me with a rolled-up newspaper. But the rolled-up newspaper of reality, if you like. But it seems to... No, not you, Keith. But it seems to me to be the case that if you accused me of using a non-dom status to avoid paying millions of pounds in tax into the UK Treasury while I lived in the UK, and I wasn't actually doing it, I think that would constitute reputational damage and therefore libel. I'm not an expert on libel. I had to go on a crash course when the current Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport libelled me in a select committee, but it turns out I've got no recourse there because she's protected by parliamentary privilege. But hey-ho, we all have our crosses to bear. So that is a really interesting point, because you have the grey area, the murky bit, don't you? Say, well, it's all perfectly legal, which it is, but so were Jimmy Carr and Gary Barlow. They got crucified by conservative media, by all media, actually. But if it would constitute reputational damage to be accused of it when you hadn't done it, then it's going to be pretty hard, isn't it, for anybody to offer up a defence of saying, well, there's nothing wrong with it. Is that... Yeah, I quite like that. Someone else can pick that apart. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. Should we get the phone lines open? 0345 60 60973 is the number that you need. The idea that you live in Downing Street itself, that your husband is essentially the... Is he the First Lord of the Treasury, the Chancellor? I forget the nomenclature, but he's in charge of the moolah. He's in charge of the Benjamins. He's in charge of the spondulics for the entire country. And his own wife is using non-domiciled status to avoid paying taxes into the treasury that he is in charge of. So, I mean, picking up on that psychological question, that little fear in my head, that, well, maybe it's not as bad as it looks because they actually did it. I want to look at that first. So the question of how bad is this on a scale of 1 to 10 is going to be quite interesting. Unfortunately, in Brexit Britain, in footballified Britain, people will be queuing up to defend Rishi Sunak and his wife, whereas if it was, I don't know, Diane Abbott's husband who was found to be avoiding millions of pounds in tax by registering as non-domiciled despite living here, it would be the end of civilization as we know it, or Keir Starmer's wife, or anybody, or Rachel Reeves's husband, or whoever it might be. So that's interesting to me, although I accept the desperation that you have to stay loyal to these truth twisters has now moved way beyond the political into the cultish and the psychological. But how on earth did they think they'd get away with it? Or how did they think it was okay, I think is the question. Because the point at which you probably become an MP is the point at which you say, well, we better make sure we're paying all our taxes in the same way that an ordinary citizen will be doing. Certainly the point at which you become the Chancellor of the Exchequer surely is the point at which you and your wife agree together that either of you having a non-domiciled status while living in Downing Street is just going to be unsustainable. The Prime Minister is the First Lord of the Treasury, not the Chancellor. Thank you. Got such clever listeners. So there it is. I mean, talk to me about how you think they thought that this was okay, right? And you can bring whatever you want into that. You can bring politics into it. You can bring psychology into it. You can bring family dynamics into it. You can bring dual nationality into it, or non-domiciled status into it, or you can even bring a defence into it, because you think it's perfectly fine too for someone who actually lives in Downing Street with the man who's in charge of the money, actively and deliberately avoids paying tax into the treasury that he is in charge of in ways that ordinary people simply don't. That's the question, isn't it? How did they think this was okay? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And we are going to be talking to Richard Murphy. An awful lot of you drawing my attention to the thread that he's issued on Twitter this morning, the tax expert Richard Murphy. We are going to talk to him a little later in the programme. And also, listen, I'm not being... I resist the urge to be condescending. It does slightly irritate me, though, Mark, in Norfolk, where you think you know more about libel law than I do. If I say it on the radio, it counts as being published. Okay, so it's libel. It's not slander. If I say it on the radio, it's published. It's about the audience that it... But, you know, thanks for the heads up. 10:16 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number. How on earth did they think this was okay is the question. And it is a status that allows you to keep hundreds of millions of pounds held offshore, free of income tax, capital gains or inheritance tax. What Rishi Sunak's wife has done, or what tax she would have been required to pay if she wasn't registered as non-domiciled, we may never know. But the question of how you could be married to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, living in Downing Street, and yet technically for tax purposes not living in this country at all, or not being domiciled in this country at all, is, to my naive and untutored eye, absolutely staggering. I wonder... I guess part of the answer to the question of how they thought they'd get away with it is the knowledge that in the current political climate they can do whatever they want. But I don't think things were quite as bad as they are now. We didn't have the knowledge of the lies told in Parliament, the parties thrown while the rest of us were practically under house arrest. Sunak didn't know when he took the job that he was going to be part of a government that has managed to ride roughshod over pretty much every regulation and requirement that we've ever had in the political sphere. So I'm just intrigued by the thought processes. That would be answer number one. You know, the rules don't apply to us. We're Boris Johnson's boys, and the rules are for the little people. Answer number two, maybe they just never thought it would come out. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. James is in Colchester. James, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Hello. Obviously, we should be taking the Chancellor to account over this, but we're all a little bit foolish ourselves, it would seem to me, because it's only when things like this pop up do we actually do anything about it, and are we actually going to do anything about this? Well, you know,
do you know who was supposed to close this loophole? You'll never guess.
Go on.
George Osborne.
Really?
George Osborne actually gave a speech about how important it was to close this loophole, and Gordon Brown hadn't done so when he was Chancellor, and George Osborne said he was going to. I mean, he didn't, but he said he was going to, just like David Cameron said he was going to clamp down on lobbyists. God, that was a distant time.
That really just exemplifies just how bad the whole system is. Not Conservative Labour or whatever, the whole system is, and how us the people have to suffer, or should we suffer, just putting up with it. And it's got to change. People like you, James, have got to push this through.
Well, come off it. No one pays the slightest bit of attention to me, mate. What, in your mind, went through their minds? And this is purely speculative, but we're still allowed to do this, as far as I know. They haven't introduced any legislation to stop us thinking out loud yet. When they must at some point surely have said, do you think you should surrender the non-dom status, darling? Or she might have said, do you think I should surrender the non-dom status on this one, darling? And what happened next?
Yes, obviously they're educated people, and they have got to have sat around the breakfast table and had the discussion about it. But this obviously goes back through decades or many governments. Then they've made this system to suit themselves, and that doesn't it makes no difference, Conservative, Labour, whatever. It just shows that the system is engineered for their benefit.
No, but you're not answering my question. What? Because we'd be spitting our shreddies out, and yet they'd be having a calm conversation about whether or not... Here it is, 2016, the flight of the non-doms. Will George Osborne's non-dom reforms do more harm than good? And the warning was that lots of very, very wealthy people will leave the country if Britain revamps a special tax status. Obviously, along came Brexit, and lo and behold, there's another reason perhaps why foreign billionaires were very keen to see Brexit put through, because if George Osborne had stayed in Downing Street, he might have closed this non-dom loophole. And who's in there now? A woman who enjoys the benefits of it. So I'll ask you again, and if you can't answer it, that's fine. I can't either. How did they think this would be okay?
I don't know.
No.
I couldn't imagine many people would be able to have the conversation and add it up in the way that it's okay.
No, does it matter that he's a spouse? So the person I was very keen not to libel earlier was Zach Goldsmith, who did have non-dom status, but I think gave it up at some point prior to standing for Parliament. The Liberal Democrats accused him of being unfit to stand for Parliament. The Lib Dem Treasury spokesman said he's claimed non-dom status all his life to keep his offshore hundreds of millions free of income tax, capital gains or inheritance tax. He must pay the millions he's dodged to the British tax man. British citizens with interest abroad can register for he's a British citizen, of course. Sunak's wife isn't. But the idea that he felt that wasn't something he could sustain while seeking to become a member of Parliament, but Rishi Sunak thought it was perfectly fine for his wife to be in the same boat. That speaks of two very different views of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, or acceptable or unacceptable, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And like Zach Goldsmith or not, he did do...
Apparently he did.
The correct thing?
Yeah, apparently he did eventually, or when he went into politics. I think there is a point, for me at least, in my naive way. Wanting to go into politics is a point at which whether you're doing the sort of Jimmy Carr, Gary Barlow thing as pop stars and comedians, there's a case for saying it's perfectly legal. Why should they not take advantage of these schemes? Jimmy Carr's haunted by that. Everywhere he goes, it still gets brought up. And I think he paid all the money back that he'd managed to hang on to legally. He paid a lot. I'm pretty sure he did. But, he's not the Chancellor of the Exchequer's wife. So I do think there should be a different standard. But the problem is it should be self-imposed. This is the problem with Johnsonian politics, is that morality is self-imposed. You have to be the one in possession of the moral compass. And, of course, well, you know the rest. Sarah's in High Wycombe. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James. I just wanted to say that they also claimed during furlough they owned gyms around Westminster, and they claimed about £500,000 in furlough.
Yes, but if the money was earned here, she will have been paying tax on it.
Right, but
still.
It's clever accounting. But Kay Burley on Sky News this morning said that a friend of hers, who was a captain of industry, had phoned her to say that he pays tax in the UK. He doesn't have to, but it's the right thing to do.
I am lost for work. Kay Burley has a friend.
But he said apparently it's the right thing to do, and I think that's exactly where we are with this.
Yes, it is, isn't it? And you know,
yes.
if you were a captain of industry or a pop star, and I can see why you might not feel any moral compunction to do it or any of that. But the idea. I mean, so the part of the defence is she's not a UK. Don't talk over me when I'm talking over you, sir. Part of the defence is she's not a UK citizen, but she's living in Downing Street.
I know.
It's incredible.
It's obnoxious, the whole thing. But
so you tell me, how do you think they thought they could get away with it, or that it wasn't obnoxious?
Because it's the arrogance with which, and it's the arrogance of the clever accounting, the way they are steering everything. We're like occupying two worlds here in terms of the country. I just think that this government are the epitome of scroungers, which is something for nothing at another's expense. So be it Johnson and I don't want a yacht, James. There is no business case for a yacht for Johnson. So why are we paying £200 million for that either?
Is that still happening? Is that going ahead?
As far as I know.
Because the Queen doesn't want it either, as far as I
know. Apparently he asked her, with his usual stealth, he asked her that he would name it after Prince Philip, and she declined, so she wasn't being duped by that one.
You pay more attention to the news than I do, or at least certain elements of the news.
Do you know, it's by listening to you that I am so...
Really?
I do a lot of things with special needs.
Yes.
But this same thing, it all leads back to the fact that we are, having to live a certain life. Our kids have, in terms of education in their schools. But my nephew is he's being educated in a shipping container.
Good Lord.
In an area in High Wycombe, it's called Desborough Road,
yes.
And it's in the Bucks Press. It is the drugs and prostitution literally right in front of you, and that isn't even a comment on addicts or prostitutes. But
I understand what you're saying. There are parallel universes unfolding. Ones where people can't afford to put their heating on or being educated in shipping containers in a particularly rough part of town, and then you've got billionaires living in Downing Street while claiming, for tax purposes, not to actually live in the United Kingdom at all. Good grief. It's a funny old world. Phone lines are open. 0345 60 60973 is the number that you need. Danny says, you are completely misrepresenting this, James. She is not a UK citizen, which I've said several times, and nor is her father, which is obvious. He doesn't live here. The business she owns shares in and earns a salary from is not based in the UK. No, I've said all of that, Danny. That's the whole point. If she wasn't non-domiciled, if she hadn't achieved non-dom status, which has absolutely nothing to do with nationality or passports, then all of the money she earns from the investments in Vladimir Putin's blood-soaked Russia and everywhere else in the world would be liable to income tax here of, I think, 38.1%. So if she didn't have the non-dom status, her passport is irrelevant, then she would be paying that tax into the Treasury that her husband has looked at and decided that everybody else in the country can afford a massive uptick in national insurance. It's just, I'm sorry, pal, that's just numbers. This isn't even an opinion, it's just counting. It's coming up to 10:30. There are a couple of phone lines free if you want to mount a spirited defence, not necessarily of what they've done, because you look at people like Goldsmith surrendering his non-dom status, you look at the appalling... well, not appalling, probably richly deserved, but very negative coverage apportioned to people like Jimmy Carr and Gary Barlow for legally avoiding taxes that they would otherwise be required to pay through clever accounting. But how they could have sat there and thought, this is fine. This is absolutely fine. That's what fascinates me. The wife of the Chancellor of the Exchequer is registered as non-domiciled for UK tax, which means that approximately £11.5 million in annual dividends, upon which she would ordinarily be expected to pay 38.1% tax, doesn't get paid because she's non-dom while living in Downing Street. It came in under George III, would you believe? But God knows why. But presumably something. Who can even begin to work out why George III introduced this tax loophole to avoid paying tax on overseas incomes? Probably because at the time he was still trousering a hell of a lot of money from his investments in America. Who knows? But there it is. And you know as well, all of the defences that are being offered up that I've heard and seen this morning are a little bit allergic to the fact once you've lived here for 15 years, you can no longer claim it. I read in one article this morning, after living in the country for 15 years, it ceases to apply. But that makes me wonder how some people, maybe there are different non-dom statuses, because some people seem to have enjoyed it for their entire lives. Well, 10:34 is the time. The question of I suppose we should also let people say that it is perfectly fine, and that, you know, when Lewis Hamilton moves to Monaco, you have an aneurysm, but when it turns out that the wife of the Chancellor of the Exchequer is not paying taxes in this country despite living here, that's absolutely fine. And also, go Gary Barlow. Gin's in Birmingham. Gin, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I think we need to focus our attention to something slightly different. Do we want our politicians making decisions without impacting themselves or their family? I want politicians who make decisions that they then feel the consequence of their decisions, good, bad, or indifferent.
They're never going to feel the consequences, are they? I mean, plenty of people considerably less wealthy than the Sunaks are not going to feel the consequences of the tax increases that he's brought in any meaningful sense. They're just going to see slightly different numbers at the bottom of their bank statements. But your point is, I think, irrefutable. If you're in charge of the tax regime under which everybody in this country must live, the idea that your own wife doesn't live under it is incredible.
Or your family. So, yeah. you know, if you look at any minister, and if you wind the clock, I don't want to unpick this, but if you look at Brexit, I voted for Brexit because I didn't want somebody sitting in Europe making decisions that impacted my life but not theirs. I want people to live in this country, make the decisions, and therefore they feel the consequence, even if it's a small consequence. And when you have a chancellor who's making decisions and they don't feel any different, it doesn't impact them, that doesn't feel right, irrespective of whether it's non-dom. And we shouldn't go after her. We should go after the point of principle that we want politicians who feel the impact of their decisions. And he's in a situation where he can make any decision on tax, and it really won't impact him.
But then that would exile everybody very wealthy from politics, wouldn't it?
No, it wouldn't. Absolutely not. His wealth.
Why wouldn't it?
His wealth is predominantly derived from this non-dom.
No, but it's not. It's not. He made his own pot of money as in the city, but
nowhere near.
No, I know. But I think we're slightly cross purposes here. I'm just confused by what you mean by impact, because I mean, if you are absolutely minted, then there are, apart from sort of, you know, like a 90% tax rate or something like that, I don't quite see how you could be impacted by most, like a tweak to national insurance. It's going to lose you. So should very, very rich people be allowed to be in politics? That's the bit I'm confused.
No, don't go down that line. You still are. Even if you look at the tax differences that are being made now, the more you earn, you will earn slightly less. It'll be slightly. You won't probably notice a difference, but the point is, you will still notice a difference.
Whereas if you're non-domed, you won't notice any difference at all, and therefore the idea that your own family is insulated from the reality of the policies that you are introducing for the rest of the country, I think is just outrageous. And that's when we come back to the question of how they could have thought it wasn't. 03456060973. Thank you, Gin, from Gin to Joseph in South Tottenham. Joseph, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so if she would be paying tax over here, so how much percentage would she have to pay?
38.1.
Okay, and now she's paying in India as well tax. So how much tax is she paying there?
I don't know that for sure. But if she wasn't non-domiciled, then she would pay tax here on the income from her overseas, from the dividends. She wouldn't pay it anywhere else.
So she wouldn't be paying there, but it's an Indian company, so she would have to pay. If you're coming
to me for tax advice, Joseph, I should tell you now that you've phoned the wrong number. Have you got an opinion to offer, or are you just treating me like Google?
No. What I'm trying to say is that she's going to be paying tax over there and over here, so she'd be paying tax twice. So if you say she has to pay here like 38%, I'm assuming over there she's also paying.
Well, you know what assume does, don't you? Frank's in Rochester. Frank, what would you like to say?
Yes, good morning, James. A very
Yes.
good debate concerning Rishi Sunak's wife's status and the ducking and diving on tax. And it is galling to think that the Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak can look straight in the camera and preach to us that the 1.25% national insurance hike that came in a couple of days ago is for the benefit of the NHS, yet the Chancellor's wife may be making tens of millions of pounds.
About 11 and a
Only
half.
she would volunteer to pay the 1.25% extra.
I'm not a fan of voluntary taxes. I think Ian Dale was a politician on with Ian Dale. It may even have been Rishi Sunak actually, who suggested that very rich people, if they wanted to, can set up a direct debit to the Inland Revenue and pay more than they're actually required to as an act of sort of altruism, which is, I suppose, preferable to making massive donations to the Conservative Party in expectation of a peerage. But it can't be voluntary. If it's voluntary, it's not tax.
Well, the other approach then would be, in these tough economic times, the generous status that the non-domiciles have had in order to attract them to this country,
Yes.
is to simply say, look, in these times of great need, we're now going to increase the tax liability on non-domiciles. Not on
Just close the loophole, because if you live here for more than X number of days a year, then you're registered here for tax purposes. The whole point, as I understand it, and we'll talk to Richard Murphy about this after 2:15, the whole point of registering as non-domiciled is that you then essentially get to choose where you pay tax, and you're going to choose somewhere that has a lower percentage on the income than the UK does. So 38.1% here. Mrs Sunak is understood to have paid foreign tax on all foreign earnings. And I suppose if it turns out that was 38.1% or 40%, then all bets are off and all moral indignation is, well, not off,
I think the
but it's
motive
reduced.
for the non-domicile status, that these people would be bringing their wealth into the country and creating
Trickle
jobs
down.
and,
Back to trickle down, aren't we?
The trickle down. And when you've got someone in the financial services sector, you don't get that trickle-down effect. So I think the Chancellor should be looking at this.
Well, I do too, but hey-ho, the naive fools that we are, thinking that it's a little bit rum to be living in Downing Street with the man in charge of the economy while deploying a special tax status to avoid paying income tax on money earned from investments overseas. Well, we are where we are. Lorraine is in Luton. Lorraine, what do you reckon?
Hello, hi.
Hello.
Right, okay. I'm probably going to be very controversial here.
Oh, do you know what? That's a bit like having a sign-up saying you don't have to be mad to work here, but it helps. Never describe yourself as controversial, Lorraine. That's for other people to do.
I'm going to be speaking to Rishi Sunak's wife.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, she has got links with Infosys, a company who I've worked with, who's an Indian company, IT company based out in India. She's Indian.
Yes.
She's non-domiciled. Non-domiciliary could apply. Anybody could access that if they wanted to, and avoid tax. It's not tax evasion; it's avoid tax.
Yes, that's all true.
It's like somebody paying your builder cash in hand. A lot of people doing it.
Well, yes,
a lot of people do it.
But you wouldn't expect the Secretary of State for Housing to do it, would you? Or her husband?
No.
So that's the point of today's conversation at the end of the day and the beginning of the day, and indeed, Lorraine, in the middle of the day. You might well have little sidelines going on or little swerves and dodginesses, but if you're in charge of everything, you shouldn't even contemplate going down there. Do you know what it would be like? It would be like passing laws outlawing parties and then having parties. It would be just like, which would never happen, would it, in a civilised society?
Which is what happened. Go back to her her situation.
Yes.
Okay. She obviously employs people over here. I would suggest she employs people over here while she's probably got staff or whatever, which she has to pay national insurances and all this sort of thing. So I can't say she evades every tax. We're talking about income tax on investment.
She's married to the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
She happens to have a job. He probably pays his tax. His wife doesn't. So what you're saying, what's the remedy then? You're saying she's supposed to...
You're not allowed, if you live here, you're not allowed to avoid paying taxes here by paying them somewhere else.
How many... Hold on. Are we just throwing the thing at everybody?
Yes, I'm happy to close it for everybody. Let's close it for everybody.
Look at Philip Green. His wife.
Yes.
His wife.
They live in Monte Carlo. They don't live here.
They don't live here? We're
not defending Philip Green, you ludicrous person. But I don't
here.
care. The loophole is that you can live here and not pay tax here. Close that loophole.
No, look, right, to everybody.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you live here and not pay tax? That is an international
Did you just
tax
growl?
law.
Did you just growl at me, Lorraine?
I just thought I just went my own way.
I've never been growled at before on the radio.
No, hold on a minute.
I'm holding.
What I'm saying is,
Yes.
international tax. Everybody globally, there are people who are non-domiciled that pay taxes, and in fact, if you earn tax, over here, if you actually live abroad and earn taxes here, or you are an expat, you still pay taxes here.
Yes.
So the whole tax law, what you're telling them is the whole tax law's got to be upended.
No, just this loophole. Just this loophole. George Osborne was going to close it in 2016. It can't be complicated. If George Osborne could do it, it must be easy.
Well, George Osborne caused a lot of. He raised a lot of other taxes.
I don't care. You just close this one, and
Right?
even if you want to start sort of getting a little bit more detailed about it, just close it for politicians and their immediate families.
Right, and we closed it because.
Because it's not right that the man in charge of setting economic policy is married to a woman who can avoid it.
Who can avoid? Oh, gosh. Okay. So basically, you don't like the fact that somebody else is being creative in terms of their family finances.
It's not somebody else. It's the wife of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Personally, I don't think that if you... I think that if you don't live in this country, you shouldn't be allowed to own newspapers. And if you do live in this country, you should pay income tax into the United Kingdom's treasury on every single penny that you earn, wherever it is coming from in the world.
Right, okay. And lots of
Otherwise, we end up becoming... I mean, imagine how awful it would be if we became imagine becoming a haven for filthy Russian billionaires who could just come here willy-nilly and ride roughshod over all of our traditions. That would be awful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But it happened.
A lot of people, like a lot of the protectorates, like Monaco, Liechtenstein, Bermuda, Bahamas, all those other places, Switzerland.
I don't want to be like them.
Well, you don't.
No, I want the people who can't afford to heat their homes to have a little bit more money left over at the end of the month, and the people who can afford to avoid tax on 11.5 million quid to have a little bit less left over at the end of the month. It's not communism, Lorraine.
It's not even communism. It's not even.
I don't. When are you going to be controversial? You said you were going to be controversial. When are you going to be controversial?
I'm obviously controversial.
We're out of time. We're out of time.
I'm actually just right.
We've run out of time.
Thank you.
No, thank you. 10:46. Take care. Have a wonderful day. It's 10:46. Well, I didn't have this on my bingo card, and I've got a big bingo card. But the Chancellor of the Exchequer's wife turns out to be legally, of course, avoiding paying income tax into the Treasury, over which her husband presides by dint of her non-dom status. Time for some expertise, I think. Richard Murphy is the Professor of Accounting Practice at Sheffield University, also, of course, an economic justice campaigner, and he joins me now. Should we begin at the beginning, shall we, Richard? Why might one register as non-domiciled? What possible reasons could there be under the sun?
Well, the only possible reason for registering as non-domiciled is to save tax. Let's just be clear, if I can, though, James, first of all, what is a non-domiciled person? Domicile is your natural country of home or location where you wish to live. Now, we get a domicile at birth. It's normally that of our father, and it's normally the place of the country where we're born, and often it aligns with our citizenship, but it doesn't have to. Critically, it definitely does not have to. But you can then change your domicile during your life because you can move to another country and make that your home, and that happens. Now, the point about the UK, and we're really odd in this case, is that if you're not domiciled in the UK, you only pay tax on your income arising in the UK and not on your worldwide income. So if you have got a lot of income from outside the UK and you're non-dom, you can apply to the revenue and say, I don't want that income that I got from the rest of the world to be taxed here in the UK. And of course, you might save tax as a result.
So when I read that more than 1 in 10 residents of some of London's wealthiest neighbourhoods have claimed non-dom status at some point, then I know why. It is because they will be avoiding UK tax rates while living in the UK on presumably epic sums of money.
Indeed, that's likely to be the case. And can I also be clear that does not mean they're paying tax anywhere else on this income?
Although it is fair, I mean, as you know, it's important to stress that it is understood that Rishi Sunak's wife is paying tax on her income elsewhere. But it's you're telling me. I'm very
happy.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm very happy for that to be said, but we don't know that. That's said, and that's fine. But I was making the general point. Yes. It doesn't have to follow that is the case.
Talk to me about then the claim here, and I shall read out what the spokeswoman for Ms. Murty has said. Akshata Murty is a citizen of India, the country of her birth and parents' home. India does not allow its citizens to hold the citizenship of another country simultaneously. So, according to British law, Ms. Murty is treated as non-domiciled for UK tax purposes. It sounds to me as if you're challenging that claim. That's not a requirement of British law.
Look, there will be hundreds of thousands of people in the UK who live here and have Indian passports, and there's no reason why they shouldn't, and they won't be claiming non-domiciled status because they will, as a matter of fact, probably not have much income arising outside the UK, so what's the point? Yeah. By the way, you do have to pay £30,000 a year to have this status. Oh, so there's got to be a significant tax saving in it. It's not something you're given for free. Well, you are for 3 years, and after that, you pay for it. She's been here for plenty long enough now to have to pay for it if she still has this status. So there really is a choice element in this. And that's the point I'm making. So a lot of people are domiciled in other countries, live in the UK, and it makes no difference to their tax affairs.
Yeah. Because it's linked to how much money you earn overseas. So people getting in touch with me saying, well, can I do this? Yeah, you can, but it's only worth doing if you're going to save more than 30 grand on money that you are earning overseas.
Yeah.
By not paying tax here.
30,000 of tax. The difference in the tax has to be at least 30,000. So we're talking about a lot of money here, basically.
I apologise for returning to the first question, and I think you're probably going to provide me with the same answer, but is there any other conceivable reason why one would pay £30,000 to register as non-domiciled, except to avoid paying tax in this country on money earned overseas? Is there, I mean, could there be anything at all, any other reason you can think of?
In reality, it has no other meaning apart from tax. So the only reason to apply is for tax purposes, and this is a status that is only given for tax purposes, and therefore there can really be no other reason for making the application. Quite literally, it's for tax and nothing else.
And I mean, you could be wrong, of course, we're all fallible, but as you understand it, this is the defence seems to be that she has no choice but to do this. But as you point out, it involves quite a lot of effort and expense to actually register to be this thing that she claims she has no choice but to be.
Well, she can, and I make it absolutely clear, she could have an Indian passport. She has got an Indian passport. She could be domiciled in India still.
Yes.
And she still need not apply for this status. Okay. The fact she's applied for it is a choice. And that's the key issue that we're really talking about here. It's not whether she's done something right or wrong. She's not done something wrong. And I absolutely am certain she was domiciled in India at least. Yes. Whether she still is, I could question if I was a tax inspector. I'm not. But if I was, I could perhaps ask the question, are you still not domiciled, given that your circumstances are you've got 3 houses here, you're married to a person whose career is clearly embedded in the UK, are you ever going to leave really in those situations? I could ask those questions as a tax inspector, but the fact is, the real question is, has she made the right choice? Should she, as the wife of the Chancellor, given that we know under the ministerial code and other things that ministers are not independent of their spouses. It doesn't matter which gender we're talking about or anything here. We're simply talking about the fact that ministers' spouses are considered to be part of the household, and what they do is considered to have a bearing on their financial considerations. Has she made the right decision? Has she paid for something which, frankly, she'd have been wiser not to have paid for?
You know, I mean, you will know this, that George Osborne was minded to close this loophole down, wasn't he? It was certainly reported as long ago as 2015, I think, that he had his eye on this. How hard would it be?
Well, look, this was a question that came up very heavily in the 2015 general election.
It did, yes. Ed
Miliband made a big issue of it. And cards on the table, I did advise Ed Miliband, and I'm not a member of the Labour Party. George Osborne responded by changing the rules in the end about domicile and making it Easier for the revenue to eventually say to somebody, you've been here for 20 years, we don't care what you know.
15, I think. 15, I can't believe I'm correcting you, but I think it's 15 years.
Actually, it is 20, because it's 15 years out of 20.
What am I playing at? Of course you know better than I do. Honestly, why did you neck in O'Brien? Ridiculous. So he put that... So actually then, when...
There is the conditionality. It can be a minimum of 15 years.
Okay.
It's the maximum of 20.
Right.
Yeah, so you're right. We're both right there. Let's call it quits.
So I mean, if she did live here then for 20 years, this would cease to apply.
Yeah, and it may do after 15 years, and she married in 2009, so by 2024 this could all be over. So that would be because of some of the rules that George Osborne changed, which came into effect in 2017. But could it be closed? Look, this could be closed overnight.
Right.
It would upset a few people who've come to live here. Would it upset them enough to make them leave? I doubt it very much. They keep on saying they'll leave. They never do.
That's always the threat, isn't it? Richard Murphy, many thanks indeed for casting an eye over the bigger story, and also, of course, the defence that's come from a spokeswoman for Rishi Sunak's wife. Richard, as I mentioned, a professor of accounting practice at Sheffield University and an economic justice campaigner. Squeeze in one more call on this, I think, and then after 11 we shall move on to something else. And it's Thursday, so after 12 we move on to Mystery Hour. It's just rotten, really. Legal, but hey-ho, just rotten. And I don't really think it's defensible. All the talk of passports and nationality appears to be hokum. And, of course, if you are tugging your forelock and doffing your cap, you will now repeat the hokum and claim that it somehow isn't hokum. But I am yet to work out the antidote to that level of self-delusion. Philip's in Guildford. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I just think that it highlights the constant shifting sands of Tory values, because I remember only a few short years ago, we'll remember the then Prime Minister David Cameron castigated a well-known comedian for using a perfectly legal financial vehicle for basically...
Did he call it immoral? We're talking about Jimmy Carr, aren't we? Was it immoral?
Exactly.
He actually called it immoral. Legal but immoral. Well, we're in the same territory, aren't we?
Exactly. I think it's a close parallel. It's not a question of whether it's legal or not, and I really like that highlighting by your previous contributor.
Yes.
It's the Pong, really. And if you're the Chancellor, you've got to know that. And there's just one other very quickie wants to point out.
10 seconds.
Quoting you a few weeks ago, you said, apropos of a rich man and charity, you cited the former Prime Minister, the Labour Prime Minister after the war.
It was an Iron Bevan, I think, wasn't it? Or was it a Labour Prime Minister? I forget. But the one about charity being a very bleak business.
It's a cold, grey, loveless thing. If a rich man feels like being charitable, let him pay his taxes gladly, not dole out his money on a whim.
There it is. I mean, it was Clement Attlee. You're absolutely right. It was. In 1920, charity is a cold, grey, loveless thing. If a rich man or woman wants to help the poor, he should pay his taxes gladly, not dole out money at whim. And, of course, Rishi Sunak appeared on Ian Dale's programme and suggested that very rich people might want to voluntarily send money to the Inland Revenue, the same Inland Revenue that his wife has paid £30,000 to avoid paying tax to on her earnings from overseas. But hey-ho, you tug your forelock, you doff your cap, you tell me why you think this is absolutely fine, because, altogether now, a rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. And there you are at the gate with your cap out, hoping that a few crumbs will fall from the tables of the Sunaks and land in your grubby little midst.